Well, we'll see how this works. Should I apologize first?
Nope, I'm going live. Okay, here we are. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to another SACPA session. SACPA acknowledges that this event takes place on the land of the Blackfoot people on the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. And we pay respect to their past, present, and future cultural heritage, beliefs, and relationship to the land. SACPA is very thankful for the continued support we receive from the University of Lethbridge, Shaw Spotlight, and the Lethbridge Herald. We're very thankful also for our speaker today, Lynn Jacobson, President of the Alberta Federation of Agriculture, who is kindly with us for the next hour on the topic of current challenges for Alberta's and Canada's farmers. Mr. Jacobson's farm is located in Enchant, Alberta, mostly irrigated. He's a board member of the Canadian Federation of Agriculture. He currently participates in various committees and boards, including the Marketing of Agricultural Products Council of Alberta, the Canadian Energy Regulator, Land Matters Committee, and Cooperators Insurance Delegate. In the past, he was an Alberta Wheat Pool delegate, president of the Alberta Soft Wheat Producers Commission, and the Alberta Wheat Commission's director. Thank you so much, Lynn, for joining us today, and we look forward to your talk.
Thank you, Annalise. I'm happy to be here and like to say greetings to everybody. And I'm glad you did the initial greeting. That always saves me some angst and trying to get that right. Anyways, today I'd like to talk about agriculture issues and some present in Canada and Alberta. Particularly, some will apply just to us, but most of the time the scope that we're going to talk about today is going to be on a national scale as we go forward, because while we don't maybe not think we're not affected by those national issues, we really are. Anyway, as said, I'm the president of the Alberta Federation of Agriculture. We're the larger producer-funded GFO in Alberta. Our membership basically is a voluntary membership with a voluntary, participation from producers. We're also a member of the Canadian Federation of Agriculture, as mentioned. And the Canadian Federation of Agriculture really is the largest general farm organization in Canada with over 200,000 members. And it's a national organization that is very diverse. It's probably the most diverse organization in Canada for agriculture anyways. And I'll name some of the members, I guess. It takes in all of the SM5, which is supply management groups, are part of the CFA. We've got members from aquaculture, horticulture, fruit farmers, mushroom farmers. We've got people there from the horse industry. We've got grains and oilseed producers, and a few more organizations. So as you can see, it's a very diverse organization, and really, it's one of the strengths of that organization, and the strength for us as an organization here, because now we get to talk to organizations all across the country. We get to take a look at their concerns. We get to know the people, and really, we're not isolated islands. So something that affects us out here in Alberta hasn't affected other parts of the country. And when people are, I guess, promoting their policies and that, to be able to take a look at what's going to happen and the effect that's going to happen on other parts of the country really is important. And the CFA gives us that national scope and the ability to sort of recognize those differences, but also there's the willingness to work with other groups together to accommodate everybody's needs and try to come together with a joint message. Anyways, I'd like to acknowledge the effect that COVID-19 has had on our industry and also on the Canadian industries. We're in some tough times, and it's changing times. And what this has brought forward lots of times is issues for the near future and also for the long range future of our organization and our country to a certain degree. Some of the things that are near term are the economy. and how that's going to affect us as we go forward in the next year or so. Also, we sort of tested our health system to a large degree this year, and we've sort of shown up maybe some of the shortfalls in our health industry, our education system. They're all issues that affect all of us, rural or urban. So I guess as we go forward, how we operate and accommodate these different conditions and that still has to be worked out. But we're going on, and we'll see how this works out, I guess, in the long run. Anyway, our industry, when I specifically focus on agriculture, we've had a very good year last year. That maybe didn't make that much sense by saying it that way, but last year was a really good year for the oil and oilseed and grains industry and some of the specialty crop industry. We've had some record high prices come about, and some of our other problems on delivery and accessing our markets have gone. So relatively unscathed in some parts of our industry. Other parts of the ag industry, though, have suffered. And we'll talk a little bit about that as we go forward. Some of the areas, though, that did have trouble were the red meat industries, specifically talk about the beef and pork are the main ones on that area. And it wasn't production issues, it was more of the marketing and pricing for those things. And then areas of agriculture basically that rely on temporary foreign workers and labor for their farms, that's another issue. And that has had an effect on some of our industries. And I guess the latest recognition or the latest statistics that we've seen come out is saying because of labor shortages in agriculture, probably we've lost about $2.8 billion in sales and economic activity because of that temporary foreign or that labor shortage as we go forward. So anyways, get on to some of my topics now. And I'd like to talk to you about basically some of the issues affecting Alberta and Canadian producers right now. One of the important things that we talk about is research, and specifically agriculture research. Now, agriculture research, to a large extent on our end, is probably two broad categories, which would be one of them would be primary research, which would be the upper end of the and for us it would be more of the seed development and those type of activities. And then we would talk about the other aspect would be the applied research as we go forward, would be the agronomics of agriculture and how that's applied. And as an example of that, the agronomics, you've got really around Lethbridge, we've got the smart Farming Smarter group led by Ken Coles. And that's the type of work that applied research is what he's really talking about. One of the interesting statistics, I guess, about research on that, if you take a look at all the money that's spent on research, whether federal and provincial and that, only 25% of that whole research budget in the country is supplied by farmers. And that's it's a bit surprising. Everybody thinks we're gathering in millions of dollars, and while we are gathering in a fairly large sum, in the overall, I guess, scheme of things, we're only funding about 25% of that research per year. That's the dollars that we're taking, the dollars that are spent. So we do need partners, and some of our partners at this point in time are the private industry, but government funding is a large part of the rest of that funding. So when we talk about research in Alberta specifically, and I'll stay on that to begin with, we've had some changes to our agriculture regime, and the French government, to a certain extent, has been working towards what they call farmer-driven research. So they started up the ARDAR group, which they say is results-driven agriculture research, I guess, directed by farmers, and that's well and good. But there's some concerns that we've had with this change, and while we're not certain how everything's going to work out, we do know there is some things that have happened, and we can probably predict on some of the areas what's going to happen. Now, with the changes that happened there, where there were about 250 to 300 people that were let go out of the agriculture department in Alberta, so it was a huge, I guess, a huge effect on staffing and on people. And agriculture research really relies on people. You got to have the money, but you need the people to do it. So what the Alberta government basically said, they're going to put in $37 billion per year. But that $37 billion is also CAP funding, which is a federal program. So the money that's coming to our research in Alberta basically is a blend of provincial money and federal money. But what's happened that, I guess with the loss of, I guess, and the let go of a lot of the people as we go forward, is the infrastructure that's happened now by taking out, I guess, research in Alberta, and we think that's going to be one of the issues is going to be extension agriculture, and extension research basically is gone out of Alberta at this point in time. It's focused on, and as we look at the ARDAR model, every group now that wants funding and that is applying to ARDAR for funds to fund the research projects as we go forward. But one of the things that has happened with the staff reduction and that, some of the top scientists have gone to universities and colleges and agriculture schools. But there is that whole group of technicians and that supported all them that system in the Alberta government that is gone at this point in time. So one of the things that we're kind of worried about basically is when you're applying for research now, when the scientists did it in the former regime or what under the Alberta thing, they could do their money, they had their things, but the technicians were paid for by the Alberta government. They were funded, they were employees of the Alberta government, and they supplied a lot of that infrastructure and that. So we have some concerns about what's going to happen in that area, because now this money, if you're going to get, say, $5 million or $4 million as a research project over 5 years or 4 years, part of that money now is going to have to go for more staffing and do. So we can see a shortfall and maybe a lack of funding to the same degree it did for the research or the actual research itself, and it's going to go for more for the staffing and that. So another issue too about the universities and colleges, that's all well and good, and we're pushing a lot of research towards university and colleges, but now we're in a regime where the university and colleges, now their money from the provincial government, and that has been cut, and their budgets have been cut back. So how that's going to work in the long run, we'll have to see yet, and we don't know exactly how that's going to work out. But we do think there's going to be less capacity and money for research in the future as we go forward, and we're going to have to be more particular. I know there has been some groups, especially from the applied research groups, applying for that, and they have made some different suggestions on funding themselves or the crop commission's funding them as we go forward. But those are all details that can't happen, and you need some legislative changes to be able to happen this. And I'd also like to say, on that area of research and the research funding, usually research happens over a time, and our funding agreements basically last for about 5 years at a time. So long-term funding is really not there, and a lot of the research projects take 10 years or 15 years to go along. So we've always had the problem, whether it's on the federal or the provincial end, of keeping and continuing that research as we go forward for long-term funding, especially when usually everything works on a 5-year cycle, and things happen within a 5-year cycle. You get change of government, you get change of ministers. That always has had an effect on research and how it's, I guess, done, and the commitment towards research. So that's one of the things that we're a bit worried about. Okay, now we'll turn on to a little bit on the federal end on the research. And really, for the federal end, that's the lifeblood of our industry to a large extent. The federal government and the public research budget is probably the largest budget and the largest funder I guess, of research for agriculture in Canada as we go forward. And some of our concerns basically are on that long-term funding as we go forward. Now, last year we had some issues in that, and one of the things that the government had stated last year, they don't state it now, is basically they were talking, or AAFC was talking about, they wanted to move from their present model of funding public research and then primary research to the upper end again, and then move upstream. So they would want to be more doing, the new crop development and those type of issues. Those areas of research and new development of, different research models and techniques for breeding and that. And then that's where they wanted to more focus on. And then they were going to leave more of the applied research, crop and the development of varieties as they were produced to the private industry or I guess producer-funded organizations. They wanted to move away from that. Well, really, the reaction from farmers was not very good on that stated things, and some of the things that have happened with some of the issues, and one of the issues I'll mention, basically has maybe changed the federal government's mind on talking about that, and we're still in continuing talks with the federal government, AAFC, about some of this research and the funding as we go forward. But as we know, crop development in Canada really is important for us as we go forward. And I guess I'd like to say right off the bat, some of the changes that the public part of the research and the public funding that has happened is a big support of us and within our industry. And there's no way that we can make up the money. And I guess for us as producers, I guess our organization's feeling is no way do we want to turn this all over the street either. So that's some of the issues. Anyways, I wanted to talk about some of the things that have happened under that research mode. And I need to have a drink here for a second. Anyway, I'd like to talk about one of the issues that under research that happened last year is what they call the seed modernization effort. And a little bit of explanation on that was about beginning of 1999, January, February, there was some meetings where the government come out and they were talking about seed modernization. And seed modernization basically comes down to the UPOV 91 issues, and the UPOV 91 is legislation that basically addresses patent protection and around intellectual property and physical property. So with that passing of that legislation, that UPOV 91, the government went ahead and they consulted with only certain segments of the industry, and basically that was more of the seed trade industry on the seed modernization. Anyway, the government did come up with a plan they thought was acceptable, and then they presented this plan. But basically, part of that plan, as we went forward, was modeled a bit on what the French do and other countries do with their seed industry, and some of the things that have happened within their industry. They were thinking, okay, they would be acceptable. But one of the models that they talked about basically was the French model, where intellectual property in UPOV 91 is recognized, and I guess as we go forward with their model, it would shift more of the emphasis of seed development onto the private industry. It would take some of their investment out of seed development and the public breeding end of it, and give more weight to the private industry end of it. It also was going to introduce a trailing royalty on seed, and that's really is a large issue for us in Canada and Canadian producers. What that trailing royalty basically was threatening, I guess, or I guess the purpose was every time we in Canada buy, or as a producer, we go and buy certified seed to seed on our farms, own that seed, and we got the right to use it the next year under the Farmer Save Seed Act as we go forward. The trailing royalty basically, though, was saying, okay, you can buy your seed, you'll have your Farmer Save seed, and you can use that seed. But every time you use that seed, how many bushels you use to seed on your farm, you got to pay another royalty on it. So it was an ongoing royalty as we go forward. And really what that did was really take or I guess it's just stopped the ability for farmers save seed. It would just, make that that legislation and that practice obsolete, because you were going to have to pay a trailing royalty. And we did some calculations on that. And right now in Alberta, there's about $8 million a year spent. I guess this is Western Canada. There's about $8 million a year spent on certified seed that producers purchase. With the trailing royalty, it was going to raise that payment up to $50 million, and that was in perpetuity, or 20 years on a variety. So there was a huge difference in how that was going to affect. So that's where we were looking at. Really, at some of the meetings that that happened, when people or producers actually got a look at the system that was being proposed, there was quite a blow up is what it was. Some of the meetings got pretty rambunctious, would be a way of saying it. And there was something said in that, but yeah, it was, I think it was a surprise for the federal government that the reaction was out there, because, well, they've been talking about this. A lot of people hadn't been paying attention, but when it was actually brought public, that's when it's really started to get. So, and then part of the things that come out of this whole thing too was with the government's stated role within this seed development thing, modernize, or what they call the seed modernization, and they were going to move upstream, and they were going to leave more of the, the development of the produced seed or the varieties to the industry. Then farmers didn't like that. So what we did is general farm organizations, especially in Western Canada, and I talk about the three prairie provinces of Keystone Agriculture Producers Association in Saskatchewan, and our organization. We did a survey of producers, and we sent it out in all three provinces, and it overwhelmingly come back that farmers were not willing to go for a seed or trailing royalty system. They did not want the government to back away from public funding. They wanted to keep that system going. And I guess the seed trade industry and the government to some degree was talking about, new variety development on seed as we go forward. I guess we as producers have been very satisfied with the public system and development of seed as we go. In fact, the top varieties in Canada and many of the top varieties that are used in the States come out of Canadian research. So at this point in time, we have been looking at the different systems, and we know in the long run producers are going to have to start putting a little bit more money into research if we want to keep the public research active, and we're going to have to maybe up our ante as producers in the future. There's some of the things, though, that we do not want to let go, and we do not want to turn our system over. In fact, to the private, I guess we do not want to really turn our breeding system over to the private industry or private companies. We've looked at, and some of the models that by turning it over to the private trade basically has been talked about is a canola model, development, where the federal government and public breeding basically got the variety, got the genes in for the Roundup Ready canolas and GMO part of that component, and then they turn it over to the private industry. And the private industry basically is controlled that, and some of the prices for seed in that, a lot of producers feel that's maybe a little bit exorbitant, and the price and very pricey, that system. So I guess some of our motivation is looking at that type of model and saying we don't want that type of model for the rest of our industry as we go forward. So that's some of the things that have happened on that seed modernization and that research. And really it shows how important, I guess, in our mind, how public dollars and the research is done and how beneficial it is not only to us as producers as we go forward, but also to the general public for food production as we go forward. And one of the things that, it's always been said, basically by 2050, we're going to have to double our food production as agriculture exporting countries to feed the world. I maybe not maybe not have to double our production, but we are going to have to look at different means of producing more food and get more efficient as we go forward. And the public part of that research is very important, we feel, in that whole process. So it's going to be a combination, I think, in the future. Private companies will be able to invest and they'll be able to do their things. And if they produce a variety that producers like, they can put a trailing royalty on it, but it is their variety. We have not put any of our money into it, but we feel as producers that if public money's gone into it and producer money's gone into it, we do not want to go down that other route of the privatization. So that's one of the issues. 5 minutes. Anyway, another issue basically is a business risk management program, and that's a real issue that we've been working on here. And this is the business risk management program basically for Alberta and most of the provinces is about crop insurance, ag stability program, our ag invest program, some of the spring price endorsement programs that we had for crop. Spring price endorsement is now gone in Alberta, but there's also a livestock price endorsement. So those are some of the things that we talk about when we talk about BRM programs. Now, we've been focusing on what the Ag Stability Program for probably the last 12 months almost. We've always said the Ag Stability Program is not really adequate for producers as we go forward. It doesn't cover a lot of our industry, and it needs some changes, and we've been pushing on that. Some of the history of it, though, was the Ag Stability Program come in about 2007, and it was a program to stabilize our industry as we go forward, and sort of handle some of them drastic changes in pricing and disaster that happened as we go forward. But some of the things that have happened, and one of the things from that original 2007 program was basically 2013, the federal government at the time, which was a conservative government, thought the program was getting a little bit too rich. There was going to be too much of a payout, so they put a payment on what they call the reference margin, which is basically eligible expenses that you can charge on your calculation. So they put a cap on that, which really cut the program back. And they also turned around and they said, okay, instead of covering up to 80% of producers with an unlimited reference margin or a reference margin that would reflect your farm's actual status, they cut it back so you only could get 70% of your 100% of your reference margin, and then you could only get a payout on 70% of the 70. So they cut the program back a long way. But one of the things that happened, though, after they did that, because that program was really took a lot of paperwork. It was very complicated to figure out your reference margins. A lot of the people, when it first came in, were going to their accountants and trying to get this figured out. And we'd heard some people paying up to $2,000 or $3,000 to the accountant to make the applications. A lot of us were doing it ourselves. And I know from my own experience with the Ag Stability Program, every time I'd put in my figures and that, they'd come back and say, well, no. Once we've checked this out, this isn't quite right. So everything. So a lot of people finally, in the end, saying the coverage isn't worth it at 70% of the 70. It's not going to affect us, especially on irrigation, that much anymore. We're gone. So we just backed out. So we got down to the program, the Ag Stability Program, was only covering about 40 to 45% of actual producers as we went forward. That was an issue too with the federal government. Okay, one of the things that we've done this winter, or last winter, basically has been talking to the federal government and about the Ag Stability Program. And basically they turned around and they said, yes, okay, we recognize the needs in that. And as we go forward, we I guess, don't want to speak for the federal government, but basically they recognized our our concerns and that, and they thought they could sort of address those concerns. So they basically made an offer in the Fed-Prov meetings with the ag ministers. They turned around, okay, we're going to make an offer here now. We'll uncap the reference margin, so it'll actually show the reference margin with your calculations for each farm. So it'd be your actual reference margin, and then we're going to raise the limit up on that. Instead of paying 70 of the 70, we'll pay 80% of the 70. So it was an improvement to a certain degree. It added about $170 million of federal money into the pot. And so we said, well, this is all we're going to get at this point in time as farm organizations. It is better than what we get now. It'll give more coverage and a little bit more certainty to this program. So we as farm organizations all across Canada endorsed this program. When it was brought to the Fed-Prov meeting, though, while most of the provinces accepted and said yes, they would go along with it, the three prairie provinces turned around and said, no, it's too rich a program, we're not going to do it, and absolutely refused to go down that route. So we started, I guess, a campaign that was called Food for Thought, and you maybe had seen some of the advertisements on Food for Thought as we go forward. That was a program that we put forward and funded by a lot of different ag groups across Canada. We formed a coalition of the cattlemen to the sheep guys to all the grain guys, fruit, everything. We all bought into the program. The CFA was administering it, the program through Edelman, which is a group that does those type of, I guess, projects. And we were, talked to the different population. We had a letter writing campaign to MPs and MLAs, and it went over very well on that. And we finally got to the point, basically, because of enough pressure being put, I guess, on our three prairie provinces. They turned around and they said, okay, we're going to have another federal meeting. We talked to the federal government and we said, make the offer, since the three prairie provinces wanted that. So the offer was made. There was another meeting held, and the results of that meeting, the prairie provinces didn't buy wholly into it, but they did agree to uncap the reference margin and go to 100% of the reference margin, which probably adds about $90 million back into the program. It leaves a lot of federal dollars on the table yet, which the federal government has said if provinces want to readjust this, yes, they do it. So they could still, join in and we could get our 80% of the 70, which would help more industries to go forward. So uncapping the reference margin does help some of our industries, and it does help some groups. Other groups, it still doesn't apply very well. So it's still a program that needs a lot of work. And by 2023, we're supposed to be en route for a new program. And that's one of the things that we'll be working on in the future is this new program. We've got FPT, people on that FPT committee, and that through CFA, and our organization is heavily involved in that, as other farm organizations, making presentations to the federal government on different ideas. Now, some of the things in Alberta that have come about that we've sort of looked at is because changes that the Alberta government is looking at margin-based programs, which are basically insurance type of programs with commercial, vendors and that end of it. Well, some of them margin-based programs do work. There is issues of cost to producers and things, and also if you have multi-year losses, what is the cost and the coverage that happens. So we do have some concerns about the type of margin-based insurance programs, and while they can work, we need some more certainty and more details as we go forward. So we'll see how that works out as we go along. So how much time do we have left? Oh, we're done. I didn't get to talk about everybody's favorite top, carbon tax. Anyway, we'll have to quit there.
We actually have a question on carbon tax already. Or no, not carbon tax, on carbon emissions. But maybe I'll ask the question then. I'll ask the first question. Terrible of me. But why don't I ask about carbon tax and give you a moment to talk about carbon tax?
Oh, okay.
moderator,
Yeah,
privileges.
okay, well, that sounds good. Anyway, carbon tax. This is a highly political issue. Everybody, I mean, it's been demonized and everything else all across the country, and different groups support this and this group supports that. So, it's going to be hard to come to an agreement on a lot of this stuff. Anyway, one of the things we'd like really to clear up right off the bat on this talk, basically, in 2020, everybody talks about agriculture's carbon footprint and how terrible it is to a certain degree. When it comes down to it, we're about 8% or 8.8% of Canada's total carbon emissions. So when you compare us to other industries such as the oil and gas and the transportation industry, 50% of the carbon emissions, agriculture doesn't look very bad. And I know everybody picks on to, animal agriculture and, the methane emissions and some of that stuff, but they never take that, I guess, the whole picture, or never look at the whole picture, especially on livestock production and the life cycle on that. And when you talk about the cattle live on grasslands and things like this, grasslands really, when it comes to carbon sequestering, are one of the big sequesters out there when it's managed right. And cattle on that landscape basically make that carbon sequestering. If you have no animal agriculture on a lot of those grasslands, the grasslands deteriorate and they don't sequester any more carbon. So it's a symbiotic relationship with animal agriculture and grasslands. I know we do have a feedlot industry that, at the end there, and their emissions are a bit higher, but overall, cattle really are a net benefit. And animal agriculture is a benefit to the country, especially in carbon sequestering as we go forward. And I know there's a lot of groups say, well, it's carbon footprint and that, but we suspect a lot of it is just against animal agriculture as we go forward. Anyway, one of the things that we talk about with carbon taxes, the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court case, everybody knows about that, has given the federal government the right to impose a carbon regime on provinces that they have to live up to if they don't have their own. So we as agriculture producers, I would say the majority of agricultural producers do not like the carbon tax in its present form. Our organization has always taken the view is we're going to have a carbon tax. So what can we do to mitigate the effects of it? So we've always been looking for ways for offsetting and offset programs and offset efforts for sequestering carbon that can basically be used against our individual footprint or our industry footprint as we go forward. So that's one of our things that we've been looking for.
Okay. Our next question comes from Maria Fitzpatrick. Question of the funding that is available. How much is federal and how much is provincial?
On the safety net programs, I take it that's where it's going on that one. The split usually is 60-40. That's I guess the split, the 60-40 funding on that end of it. And that'd be between the provincial and the federal governments. And then the producers basically pay a percentage of the crop insurance commercial premium average. So they'd be paying maybe up to half or 50% on that end of it. But the administration and everything else is covered by the governments on that, under their split on their 60-40 programs.
Okay. Our next question comes from Trevor Page. Agriculture produces 1/3 of global greenhouse gas emissions. How do you see these being significantly reduced?
Yeah, interesting question. But he's talking global and I guess livestock agriculture in a lot of different countries. And I guess every country is different in how they handle it. For Canada, basically, when it comes down to it, and like I mentioned before, we're about 8% or a little over 8% of the actual emissions in Canada is animal agriculture. Now, we're talking about sequestering programs and grassland programs and different ability of livestock, agriculture to help with that sequestering program and get recognized, because it is a life cycle program. It's not just, at this point in time that the emissions are, and that's the emissions. It's all over a whole life cycle that you got to look at it. And like I talked about, when cattle are out on grass and grazing on forage ground and that, basically that forage and the way it's being helped and the beneficial effects of that forage as we go forward, basically sequesters carbon in the soil. And you can manage it, and you can increase that by grazing programs and how you handle that. There also is some research that's being done on some different additives to cattle's rations when they're in feedlots, and that's basically the seafood, some algae or basically kelp type of seafood. That's added to the ration that does cut down on the methane emissions in livestock feed. So there is that type of research that's going on too, and that's helping.
Our next question comes from Laurie Schultz. Are Alberta farmers concerned about the impact on water and or air quality on their crops should coal mining on the eastern slopes go ahead?
That's another issue, yes. And I would say yes, we are, especially in areas as mine that really relies on the eastern slopes for our water supply. We're not like BC that has a whole range of mountains and a whole different, our whole province to collect water with mountains and runoffs. In Alberta, since the prairies are and Alberta is fairly dry, especially in southern Alberta, we rely on those eastern slopes for our water supply. And basically our feeling as an organization is, as we go forward, if we start tampering with that water supply and we do coal mining, it's not only is going to take a water supply away from us and the allocation, because they do need water to process the coal and that. The other part of that mining, though, is a contaminant, and basically celium is one of the large contaminants that comes out of that, and how that flows down, and that's not very good. So we don't want to really endanger what we have as an industry in southern Alberta through the irrigation areas, which is one of the largest crop production areas in Canada. I think we produce 40% of all the stuff or the food stuff and products in Alberta. So we're a large part of the whole industry, and we do have a food processing industry that's not only sells domestic, it also sells international. And you start contaminating that food supply with your water supply or other elements as we go forward, it's going to have a real drastic effect on our ability to keep that food processing and our agriculture industry viable on the prairies.
Our next question comes from Mark Goodall. How much do you think the Seed Modernization Act was the result of pressure by companies producing genetically modified cultivars? They want control of their seeds.
Yeah, well, yeah. Part of it is wanting to have control of the seeds. Another part of it is also, the ability to capitalize more or extract more money from producers. As we went down that whole model, the breeding technology, basically the old GMO technology, is really falling by the wayside in a large degree. We're going to what we call now the CRISPR technologies, which is not the same as a GMO. And we're hoping that CRISPR technology is going to be accepted in Canada as a regular breeding thing, and that's really going to speed up our breeding process in Canada. But the control of the system, basically, if you, instigated what the government was talking, they would move upstream. you would leave a gap in the middle of the crop development and the variety development after it's being developed by the federal government. They would sell that off, say on the F6 generation, and then that would be under complete control of a company or whoever bought that, and they would be able to develop it and they'd be able to charge what they want. But the real thing was being able to extract more money, and then I guess have, with the trailing royalty model, basically negating, or the negative effect that would have on farmers, say seed, would basically say that we have to go and purchase new seed every year. So it mainly means more money for the seed trade industry as we went forward. And one of the interesting things from the seed growers and the seed trade industry, there was a proposal to amalgamate the seed trade industry, such as the crop life companies and those entities, with the seed growers and make one organization out of there. That come to a vote this winter, or over the winter. The seed growers rejected that overwhelmingly. Well, maybe not overwhelmingly, but they they rejected that effort, and they said no, they wanted to stay independent, which has helped our argument to a large degree, that producers what they want, and has made it I guess come to some conclusions. And we're working on a white paper through the CFA for a presentation to the federal government, and they seem to be listening and are asking for opinion on this whole issue. But we've always said public research, we want to keep that. The funding on that end of it is very important to us as farm organizations and producers. We have no objection if a seed company wants to develop a variety and they want to put it on the market. They can do what they want, and they can treat it however they want. But it would have to be really have to have some outstanding features for producers to buy into it. On that end of it, we recognize that the seed trade industry would like to take control of the breeding industry, but we're fighting them on that issue, I guess, and saying, no, we don't want that, or we don't want your model.
Okay.
And maybe that doesn't answer that question. I'm not sure.
Our next question comes from Ian Hurdle. Are you able to offer comparisons in the size of agribusiness food production in Alberta versus gas and oil production/processing?
Oh, yeah, I don't have the figures with me right now, but we're a large part of the Alberta economy. In fact, behind oil and gas and that, we were the second largest industry, basically, for Alberta on exports. So we're in the billions of dollars with agriculture export. Oil and gas industry was leading with their exports and their cost structure and usage. But since the turn down in gas and oil prices and that, it's brought us a lot more to a level playing field. They're both, I guess, because our industry as agriculture is a heavily carbon industry to a certain degree. We use a lot of carbon in our day-to-day efforts as we go forward. So the oil and gas industry is important to us too as agriculture producers. I know we have people saying, okay, let's get rid of the oil and gas industry right away and we're going to camp a lot, but they don't realize the effects that would happen. So if you turned around and you just destroyed what you would see as the oil and gas industry and the infrastructure, and basically restrict that whole system, you're going to have an effect on a lot of other industries that people depend on. So we're saying our industry is really important. It can be, one of the economic drivers in the future. In fact, we're promoting it as one of the bright spots in the Alberta economy for the recovery of the COVID-19. So we think investment in agriculture is very warranted by the government and the public and by producers. And we're saying we're willing as an industry to step up and make those investments, but we need some insurance for the long run because of the wide swings within our markets and that. So we need some assurances as we go forward.
Okay, our next question comes from Knut Peterson. The cost of land has gone through the roof over the last decade, largely because of big corporate farms, basically making it impossible to get started for new young farmers. Are you concerned?
Oh yeah, yeah, we are concerned, and we recognize as an industry and as an organization the cost of actually getting into agriculture on the basis of a lot of farms as they are now. Basically is almost impossible unless you marry into it or you inherit it. And you sort of come up within the. We know it's very cost, and the cost of land is not good for the guys entering. It's great for us, like my age now, that are thinking of, well, maybe I need to, to step back in that and that end of it. But there's got to be a comp. We feel, and we need some of the programming in that. I guess the consolidation of farms has gone on for a long time. The average size of farms has gotten bigger and bigger. What a lot of people will call corporate farms, basically, the majority are not corporate farms, basically, in the sense of a corporation. They're family farms that are, have incorporated, and they got the company with the family members owning that company. There is, though, some different investors in farmland now, and it is becoming more of an issue as we go forward. Like Manual Life Insurance Company now has been buying up farmland as it exists. The Ontario Teachers Pension Fund has been buying land in our area. We've got other corporations that have come in to do it and buy land. I know of a couple, especially in Saskatchewan. They've increased, the farmers increased his farm holdings, and one I know is basically over 100,000 acres that they increased in the last 10 years. And when you talk to the person, basically he says, well, I got investors. So basically the way they're getting around some of the ownership rules of being Canadian citizens for foreign entities, basically, is you form a company, that people invest in your company, and then you maybe still, you got your shares, and so the company invests, and that's how they're getting around some of the rules on that end of it. But the price of land is really expensive in that. And I guess we've talked about this before. I see in the future there's going to be two types of farming. There's going to be the large farmers, which are going to more rely on the export market and exporting their crops, and then you're going to have the local food market. As our population increases, there's going to be an opportunity for that local food market to expand, and they're going to be the 30 acre, the quarter section farms in the future.
Our next question comes from Henning Mundell. As a former federal public plant breeder, and then in brackets AAFC here 1978, with great support from the provinces through a program called Farming of the Future, producer groups and crop industry, I appreciate your support for public breeding. So I guess that's more a comment versus a question, but maybe you'd like to comment anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I appreciate that remark, because I guess our feeling, and I've been involved in this industry a long time, as you can see, with a bit of a gray hair sitting here. Public funding that the federal government has done and the provincial government is the lifeblood of our industry. If we want to keep control of it, and we want to have some issues that we can bring forward and control of this whole industry as producers. Without that investment in the public research in the future, and if that's withdrawn, then you're going to see more and more of the agriculture industry being commercialized, and it's going to be controlled by fewer and fewer entities in the future.
Our next question comes from Laurie Schultz. Would you be able to comment further on the research on seaweed as livestock feed? Is this a viable practice in the short term?
It's one of the things that have raised up on one of our board members, Grace McGregor. Basically has been looking into this. She's one of our board members that likes to look at some of this stuff, because they are livestock producers themselves. And she's saying with the research that's being done and that, it is an industry that can be viable. It just needs some more development, maybe a little bit more research dollars. The results, from according to Grace, were quite surprising on the reduction of methane gas when it was sort of added into the animal's diet. So a lot of it, I think, is going to depend on the research that's done and the cost of that product. What is going to have an effect on the price of feeding.
Our next question comes from Ian Hurdle. What percentage is the agriculture on the prairies of Canadian agriculture?
Huge. That's what's going. It's in the billions of dollars. I mean, you look at Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Alberta, BC. When you talk about the Western provinces, that whole industry is huge. I mean, we're not as big a province as Ontario, Quebec, and that, but probably in the scheme of things, we're probably close to maybe about 2/3 of the whole thing. But it depends on the type of industries you're talking. If you're talking more about the fruit industry and that, well, that's different. BC and Ontario and the Maritime or Eastern provinces are the ones that are doing in that type of fruit industry. So it just depends on which part of the industry you're talking about. When you're talking about supply management, the large supply management is, I guess, industry is located in the east in Ontario and Quebec because of the population, because you're being close to your population, you're serving that population, and the formula for production for your supply management groups basically is based on your usage in your province and that, and there is some export, trade between provinces, but it's basically based on your province. So a lot of those type of industries rely on the population in the region.
Our next question comes from Mark Goodall. Are you looking forward to driving your first electric powered tractor? When do you think that may be happening?
It's going to be a bit of time before that technology really gets up and running. I think what you're going to see to begin with is electric diesel power units as we go along, and there is some work being done on autonomous agriculture implements, and basically that autonomous implements will be smaller, power units or tractors and smaller tillage or seeding equipment behind there, but it'll work 24 hours a day instead of the 8 or 14 hours a day that a lot of people do. So yeah, it's going to be interesting. I mean, artificial intelligence and the development of that is hooked into this whole thing too, because we need that aspect of technology to really come forward and being more useful to us, because our rural connectivity on the internet and our ability to access, let's say, that G5 technology, which needs to be done for a lot of autonomous operations, is not here at this point in time. And that's another issue that we're working on, is connectivity in rural areas.
Our next question comes from Knut Peterson. Greenhouse farming of vegetables has great potential. Is your organization actively promoting the endeavor?
Well, greenhouse industries, yes. We promote it where it makes sense, in economic sense. The greenhouse industry is, I guess, is larger in Eastern Canada because of the population. It's closer to that. We do have quite a greenhouse industry in Alberta, and one of my friends from BC, Stan Vanderwall, has basically a huge greenhouse. He's probably got about 40 acres of greenhouse out in the Turn area, which is a new development. But yeah, greenhouse agriculture is coming, but the downside of greenhouse agriculture basically is the energy over the winter months that is used. I know the natural gas bill for some of the greenhouse to continue their operations and run their things is just horrendous. And they did get a 50% reduction on their carbon tax as a greenhouse operator from the federal government. So that helped them, but their costs of production are huge too, I guess, when it comes down to it.
Okay, that was all our questions. And before we wrap up our session today, do you have a take-home message for our viewers?
Yeah, I didn't work on this very much. She's laughing. Anyways, I guess agriculture affects everybody would be my message. We all participate in agriculture every time we sit down at the table and eat or we have a snack. You're participating in agriculture. So what I would say, we would really like people to, and people involved in agriculture, to really take a serious look. There's a lot of, I guess, special interest groups that are running around, and the internet and these things basically have caused a lot of trouble for agriculture. There's so much false information running around there, and everybody has an idea, and they get spread it. And like the old saying, you say it 3 times, people start to believe you. The more you say it, the more they believe you. That issue is common out there. So one of the things we would encourage people is get involved. We're happy to see people more involved in knowing where the food comes from and wanting to get involved. I mean, if you can, support agriculture and buy local if you can. We always put that promotion out there. And if you want to get involved farther, like with our organization, we basically have a membership designed for the urban public. Basically, it's just an association fee, basically of $25. It allows you to participate within the conversations on our organization. And if people are interested, they can buy that associate membership. They don't get to vote on that, but they get to express their opinions and bring their opinions forward to us as agriculture producers, which is valuable.
Okay. Lovely. Thank you so much. There's a few thank yous in the queue. Lynn, thank you for your presentation this morning and covering such a wide array of issues facing farmers. On behalf of SACPA, thank you very much for coming here today and for your talk. Everybody, I hope you'll join us next week when we have Paul Hinman, interim leader of the Wildrose Independence Party, on the Wildrose Independence Party's vision for Alberta. So we hope you'll join us again next week. And that'll be the end of today's session. And make sure to give us a like if you like our channel, please. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay. Thanks, everybody.